in the middle and late 19th century, as he watched his people, the Native American people, get pushed aside onto reservations, and watched the United States take over lands that were once pristine. And he was always very concerned about what the results would be. And so I'm going to read some quotes. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. Oneness. Another quote, he kind of says the same thing in a different way. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. When the earth is sick, the animals will begin to disappear. When that happens, the warriors of the rainbow will come to save them. The warriors of the rainbow. Now, what do you think he meant by that? Warriors of the rainbow. Here's another quote. And when the last red man, he refers to Native Americans as red men because that was a common terminology in the time in which he lived, unfortunately. When the last red man shall have perished from the earth, and his memory among white men shall have become a myth, these shores shall swarm with the invisible dead of my tribe, and when your children's children shall think themselves alone in the field, the store, the shop, upon the highway, or in the silence of the woods, they will not be alone. In all the earth there is no place dedicated to solitude. At night, when the streets of your cities and villages shall be silent and you think them deserted, they will throng with the returning hosts that once filled and still love this beautiful land. The white man will never be alone. Let him just and deal kindly with my people, for the dead are not altogether powerless. Now, this is his thoughts on watching his people and the numbers of his people dwindle to smaller and smaller populations. He says, my people are few. They resemble the scattering trees of the storm, swept plain. There was a time when our people covered the land as the waves of a wind ruffled sea cover its shell-paved floor. But that time long since passed away, with the greatness of tribes that are now but a mournful memory. Had to have been quite a time for him. But in watching that change happen, he realized that the impacts to the web of life would also cause changes. Now, the web of life is also a system theory, and it was really presented through book form by a physicist by the name of Friedrich Capra from Austrian. He became a founding director of the Center for Eco-Literacy in Berkeley, California. And much of his work has to do with the connections and the systems view of life. And the new paradigm thinking in science and in religion that start to yield a different kind of view of the universe. Now, his idea was that our culture, our Western culture, needed to let go of conventional linear thought and the mechanistic views of Rene Descartes, and that life wasn't a mechanism to be studied in parts, but actually a whole. And in his book, The Web of Life, he focuses on information generated by the relationships among all parts as a significant factor in understanding the whole, emphasizing the web-like structure of all systems and the interconnectedness of all the parts. So it's this new understanding of something called complexity. And complexity, besides being a word, of course, it's also a characterization of how a system or model behaves when its components interact in multiple ways and follow local rules. So the word complex comes from Latin roots com, meaning together, and plex, meaning woven. Complex, woven together. A complex system is characterized by its interdependencies. And that's contrasted with a complicated system. Com again, in Latin meaning together, but plic means folded together with many layers. A complicated system is characterized by its layers, and a complex system, complexity, is characterized by interdependencies. And it's used to characterize something with many parts, where those parts interact with each other in multiple ways, culminating in a higher order of emergence greater than the sum of its parts. Complex system is a web of life, or the web of life is a complex system. So, Mr. Capra, in his book, The Web of Life, emphasizes that approach. And if you look at our healthcare model more and more, people are advocating for, and doctors are taking a more holistic approach. Rather than just focusing on a symptom, doctors now look at the whole picture. What's going on in a person's life? How is their energy level? What is their sleep like? What's work like for them? What is their home life like? Those things are part of the new paradigm, if you will, of thought, in which everything affects everything else. It's a very important, I think, and perhaps the most important change in our worldview that has happened. My goodness, honestly, since the advent of atomistic scientific thought and the the approach to the study of the world as a parts system. Very interesting. So the web of life, if we think of it that way, if we think of the World Wide Web, which we obviously have experience with, we think of how that works. Everything that gets added to the web changes the web, right? If you're not familiar with algorithms and how they work, when you go to a Google search engine or another search engine and you're looking for information, the number of searches affects what you're going to find. And the algorithms that are used to help with those searches changes as people interact with those algorithms. So it's fascinating to think about, of course. Now, there's a movie that it would behoove you to seek out if this is an interesting concept to you. And it's a movie called Mind Walk. And Mr. Capra contributed to the screenplay for this movie that came out in 1990. It stars Liv Ullmann, Sam Waterston, and John Hurd. And it's based on, it's loosely based on his book, The Turning Point. And Mind Walk is just this walk through some of the most beautiful museums and scenery as these very amazingly smart people talk about metaphysical concepts and things like, how connected we are. And at first you might think it'd be kind of a talky thing and not very interesting, but it actually really does keep your attention and gives you a lot to think about. So, Mind Walk is the name of the movie. Stars Liv Ullmann, Sam Waterston, and John Hurd. I'm sure that you can find it somewhere, since there is so much availability now of movies in the digital stream, if you will. So on with the Web of Life here. And of course the Web of Life is very important to our survival. And global warming obviously affects that. And obviously the impact of global warming, which some people are still debating as to the reality of it, but most scientists look at the data and agree that the planet is warming. And we start to see the effects that it's having as greenhouse gases rise and other things that we do, such as clearing the land, such as taking trees from the rainforest,